Hello, everybody. This is Lafayette Faust, and I am here with James Joseph Jones. He has come to the bunker tonight to return a favor. I interviewed him a couple of weeks back, and I am thankful that everyone has been embracing that those 3 episodes where we were discussing writing and his process and just his life, because those have all been received very well. So he's returning the favor by he's going to be asking me some questions tonight. So with that, we invite you to sit back, turn on a light, and prepare yourself.
Well, good evening, podcast audience. This is James Joseph Jones, and I have infiltrated the bunker and taken Lafayette Faust hostage for one evening. I'm going to press him for some information about which I've been rather curious. So I'm glad you're being a cooperative hostage, Lafayette. So I was curious, when I met your son, this was before I'd ever met you, he told me that you had been a sort of a detective fiction mystery writer, and you were right, I guess, on that cusp of switching over to horror writing. So I'm curious about your, because I stink at trying to solve mysteries. I've gotten a little better with watching it with my wife, Midsummer Murders, classic, long-running British mystery, wonderful program. But I always wonder how you do it, how you set it up. Do you have an end situation and you work backwards? Do you have a situation and you figure out how it happened later? I mean, where do you start with? The end, the sort of the solution, or the problem?
That's a good question. So to give you a little bit of background, for 20 years, I was an investigator in real life. And I worked with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and I worked primarily white-collar crime kind of stuff. There were other things that I did. I went undercover with the Knoxville County Sheriff's Department, where I was fitted with a wire, and it's not the wire like you see on TV and in the movies where they duct tape it to you. You know, it's usually some form of technology. You know, it could be your cell phone, it could be a necklace. I had a necklace. I'm not a necklace guy, but I had a necklace, and the pendant on the necklace was a camera. So, I've always enjoyed investigative stories along with that, because it's an intellectual, concept. In real life, I was having to use my mind to figure out what happened here, who did it, why they did it, and, bring that to resolution. So when I started trying to get serious as writing, the first novel I wrote it's called Hostile Intent. It's kind of a mystery / spy novel / science fiction. It was one of those things where I was dumping a lot of my love of various genres in there. But, as we were talking on your interview, my heart's always been in horror. Which still can use all those elements. But to answer your question specifically, I found that as a writer who writes mysteries, where you've got someone trying to solve the crime, you need the crime first. You have to have the crime first so that there's something to solve. And I played around with a lot of different approaches. One was, okay, here's the crime. You've got, someone who's been killed with, say, some sort of odd instrument. And at that point, I already knew who did it. And then I'm along for the ride with the with the detectives trying to figure it out. But I was kind of on the inside. I knew what was happening. And that's, for me, that was the most successful way for me to write a mystery novel or a mystery story. Now, when I tried it The other way, which is the way I write horror, is the way Dean Koontz and Stephen King and those guys do. They go, here's the situation, let's just see what happens. We discover it as the characters are discovering it. I tried that a couple of times with mystery writing and never could make that work because, like you said, at some point you have to know what happened so that they can figure it out. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't leave some things, unanswered for yourself, but I never could make it work with the concept of, oh, we stumble upon a dead body, let's figure out who did it. And I'm along for that ride. I had to go, okay, James Joseph Jones walks upon a body, and this person has been killed with a pair of wire pliers. So now I had to know what was going on so that they could get there. So does that answer your question?
It does, and it makes sense. It clicked when you were explaining it. Of course, with horror, it's a lot easier to be a pantser, sort of just sitting there taking dictation almost as the characters, are vying for your attention or telling you this so fast. Sometimes when you get on a good roll, that you're having trouble getting it all down quickly enough for fear you might forget some of it, and then you, as a writer, know you can go from that 90 miles an hour into a brick wall and hit your block. But we talked about that, just writing out the block. Have you used you and your son Ethan are pretty close. We talked before about some of the little adventures and things you had when he was growing up. Have any of your family members, including Ethan or pets or anyone, been character inspirations for you?
Yeah, that of course. I think you would even say with your writing, even though some of your writing is set 200 years in the past, that you still draw from people from time to time. For example, in Nevermore Hollows, Alyssa Hart, the coroner and medical examiner, she's drawn a lot from my sister. My sister is not a coroner or a medical examiner. She's a nurse, but the way I describe Alyssa, that's my sister. Okay. The way she acts, that's my sister, and I just put her in. I said, excuse me. I was like, well, if my sister was a medical examiner, how would she approach these things? So that's kind of it's something that all writers do, so that I don't have to fully create a character from scratch. Though we do a lot of that. 95% of the characters in Nevermore Hollows, I've made them up from scratch. But if you've got somebody where you go, this is a perfect person to play off of in this fictional world, because my sister has a very unique way of looking at life, and I was like, okay, that would be perfect for a medical examiner to be, because in Nevermore we want everything to be a little quirky,
just a little.
So if she was, loved the whole hippie idea and refused to use, basically to put it this way. If my sister was a medical examiner, would she use a black van to carry bodies around in? No, she would not. Right? So there is the nugget of a character. And then from there, well, what else would she do? How would she approach it? Would my sister be, if you pulled in a monster body, say it was a half snake guy, and you brought it into her, and put it on her examination table, how would she approach it? Well, my sister would be just totally nonplussed with it. Okay, this is a half snake guy. So I thought, that's who I want in this world to be the medical examiner.
Gotcha. Okay. She must be pretty hard to shake if she would be nonplussed.
Right.
With a body with a snake head. Yeah. But
yeah.
Anyway.
And that's her. And then there's a couple of other folks. I wrote Chris into the. He did some work. I've known Chris for 30 years, and through a series of events, we ended up back together as creative people. And I'll just tell you, he tells the story a little bit differently than I do, but I'll tell you how he came into my world. 30 years ago, I knew his current wife, which is his wife of 30 years. And she and I used to go to concerts together. We were real close friends. And then she met Chris, and then Chris comes into that world. And then life gets in the way, and you don't meet, you just grow apart. And then, every 3 or 4 years, Chris and I would come back together, and it was like we were the long-lost brothers. And we picked up literally on the conversation we were having 2 years ago. Well, we go through a very long space of time where I hadn't seen him in 10 years, right? And so he was, kind of like you. He would see Ethan out, and Ethan knew of him, and he would always speak encouragement to Ethan's art. So one day, I'm at a store, and there's Chris, and he goes, "Hey, man, what are you doing now?" And I said, "Well, I've got a podcast." He's like, "Cool, that's it." Right? So a couple of weeks goes by, and he texts me, "Hey, man, what's the name of your podcast?" And I sent it to him. Now, I'm really bad at self-promotion. And then
I'm in your camp there.
Right. And, he and I were just talking about that before you showed up at the bunker. He's great at self-promotion, but I'm not. So he calls me up, and again, so we've had one meeting in years, and he says, "Hey man, let's go grab some lunch." So we go to lunch, and he pulls out all this character art from Nevermore Hollows that he's done all the character studies on, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, man, this is amazing." I said, "What do I owe you?" He goes, "I just want to be part of it. I just want to be part of it."
That's great.
So I thought, well, okay, this is very fortuitous and serendipitous. So this must be what we need to be doing. So to thank him, because he wouldn't take any money, and to just kind of welcome him into the Nevermore Hollows universe, I wrote a story where he was in it. And it's one of my favorite stories. Is Hippies from Hell.
Okay,
and
I haven't seen that one yet.
Look, it's got some of the, knowing now that I'm not writing just for myself and for anybody who may be listening, but for an artist. When he showed me those art concepts, I realized I needed to be very descriptive and give him some things to work with as the artist of Nevermore Hollows. So there's some scenes in there where when these hippies show up, and it's basically my Manson story, all right? These hippies show up in the middle of the night where Chris has just moved into Nevermore Hollows, and there's some really weird things that happen. I mean, very trippy. I was thinking, okay, hippies, LSD, all that kind of stuff. So what kind of imagery can I give him that would seem almost like he's on a trip? So to get to it and to answer more of your question about drawing upon people I know, I just literally put Chris into the universe.
He's a big enough character, literally and figuratively. Love you, Chris, on his own. So, he would make a wonderful resident citizen of Nevermore Hollows.
And he's easy, because again, he's a quirky guy, like we are. We're quirky. We like to be, individualistic, and he's got a background where he was a deputy, so he's one of those guys you look at him and you go, dude, that's a big dude. But he's unassuming, because he's such a sweet guy, but he'll kick your ass too, right? So what you want to, so that's the kind of character traits where I go, I can work with that. So, but he's one of them too and I didn't even change his name. I mean, it's Chris Goins, Chris Madman Goins, and he's in the Nevermore Hollows universe now. So, all right, so good. So there we go.
And I'm going to toot your horn for you here. So what name did you write under when you were doing your... what name were you writing under when you did your mystery novels?
It was James Allen. Okay. Again, so I'm trying to be... Anybody that listens to Nevermore Hollows, you can see the goal is creativity. Do something that's never been done. The reason that I've not written a full-on vampire story is because I couldn't figure out how to do vampires differently. Like dogmen, it's always like a werewolfish thing. Well, my dogman, is a pit bull and it speaks. My gnomes are not like gnomes you're ever going to see anywhere else, right? I wanted to go, if I can't write something that's never been written before or with a fresh perspective, I don't want to do it. And, we've created a lot of our own monsters in this one. The next story that's coming out is called Mr. Crispy, right? So if you're listening to this will probably come out before Mr. Crispy, but Mr. Crispy, it's a new monster. I thought, how can I create a new monster? But to get back to, I tell you all that to say this. When I was trying to write as a, a mystery writer, a spy novelist, I was squashing that creativity, even as far as my name, James Allen. That's very vanilla, as opposed to Lafayette Faust.
Yeah.
Right? So when I decided, I'm going to be a horror writer, I'm going to embrace horror because that's what I love, and I'm going to be a horror writer, and I want to do something different, I even agonized over the name. It took me forever to come up with Lafayette Faust. But I figured if I'm writing as Lafayette Faust and the character of Lafayette Faust is there, that's going to inspire me to write from that character and not James Allen, vanilla guy.
Another question I had was, and I've sort of pestered you about this before, when are these podcasts, because I see your scripts are written out for them, when are these going to be compiled into a book, a collection that people can buy and enjoy right there in their hands and just read it themselves?
That is on the horizon. There's a couple of things I'm waiting on. Okay, the first thing is how I got to Nevermore Hollows, and I think I might have told you a little bit about this. Is I published the first book, and it was met with okay success. The tiny publisher, and they're like, hey, we want to do a second one. But by that time, I was already moving forward with horror, and so I'd written another book. It was a horror book, and it was where I was really starting to try to get creative. Really creative, and embrace this kind of concept of just doing something different. And now, the book was the beginning of Nevermore Hollows, and I started shopping it around to agents. And they kept wanting me to change the characters and change the narrative to push agendas, certain social agendas. I'm like, well, I don't want to push any of that. One, it's got to be something I believe in. But I think at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, first, tell me a good story. Just tell me a good story. Tell me a fun story. Now, if you can make social commentary in that, great. But that shouldn't be the goal. The goal should be just tell a damn good story. And then if you want to say something about your own political beliefs or anything like that, first, the story has to be good. That's one of the things I stopped reading so much Stephen King, is because, the stories are now vehicles. So at some point in there, he's going to make some sort of political statement that it took away from the story. Or you can say, oh, well, this story was designed around that right there. So where I'm going with this is, I got frustrated because, publishing now has become less about talent and let's just market, is this a way that we can push an agenda? So after a lot of thought, I thought podcast. I didn't even know what a podcast was, to be honest with you. I knew there were podcasts out there, but I thought that was just for, I don't know. I don't even know what my thoughts were. So I decided to start putting these out. Well, now to get to the answer, as you can see, I'm wordy.
You're an author, so I've enjoyed the workup story. So you've ratcheted up the anticipation,
right?
So
got to lay the groundwork. So what I'm hoping is there's two ways we can do it. I could publish it myself, which I've done stuff like that before, and that's a viable way of putting your work out. But what I'm hoping is that the podcast is growing really fast. It's doing really well. And we're trying to grow YouTube. YouTube is growing slowly. But what I'm hoping is that I can build enough of a following that there's the leverage there that I can go a more traditional approach and have that leverage where I can go, I'm not changing it. It is what it is. This is what I want to put out. So I've given myself another year. If at the end of a year I don't have that leverage, I'm going to put it out. I'm going to put it out myself because that's what I love. I'm a writer. I want to see it in book form. But if at the end of a year I've reached certain goals, I think we're going to see something that's going to be more widely available and more of what I would like to see. So that's where I am. That's the plan for Lafayette Faust and Nevermore Hollows at the moment. Because if you can go that route, if you can get the clout to go that route, that opens up other doors like TV shows, movies,
sure.
Right? And Chris and I were talking before you got here. As creatives, you're always on an emotional roller coaster. One minute you're like, yes, I see this is going to be something someday. We're headed somewhere.
Indeed.
And then the very next moment you're on the plummet. On the roller coaster. You're going down, and you're like, man, it's never going to get where I want it to be. But I've shown you. I literally wake up every morning with a plan. It's a business plan. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing today to move Nevermore Hollows further along. So I'll say this, to wrap that up, to put it into a more succinct answer. In 12 months, I will either have a more traditional publishing route or I'll be publishing it myself.
All right. That's the black and white of it. Also, as far as audiobooks, you basically have your audiobook chapters already recorded. Very entertaining to listen to. The narration, the sounds. Sometimes I'll be thinking, okay, where did he get that from, or what did he do that with, or where did he find that? So that's a lot of work saved already, since you already have these wonderful short stories, individual chapters of a collection of stories.
And you're right. It would be easy since they're already written. And of course, I approach it as a writer. I don't write a script so much as I literally write the story. As if you were to go buy a book or a collection of short stories, that's what these are. So it would be easy to just literally pull them together into a volume and put it out. Now, I'll tell you this. You're talking about the sounds and the immersion there. That's one of the things I started doing early on is all the competition that's out there, like on YouTube, and even in the podcast realm, they're readers. They're not writers. They're reading other people's stories. And they're very successful at it. There's some readers out there that are really good readers. They either narrate well or the stories are crap. Or the stories are good and it's not narrated well, but there's some successful folks out there. But what I've been noticing, because I scout, part of my business plan is I go in and I look at the comments. So the top 6 readers on YouTube have somewhere around 6-7 million subscribers. Now, obviously, there's some overlap because of what I'm getting ready to say. But one of the things I'm starting to see in those comments, because I read those comments all the time, and you got to know what the competition's doing, right? Is they're all saying, this story was on the other channel. I need something different. They're all telling the same story from the same writers. So the audience is starting to get frustrated with that to some degree.
So you're saying that, say, a single story, is being read by different readers?
Yes, on YouTube. So you got multiple readers, but the big 6 that are out there right now, they're all reading the same story. So what you're seeing is some of the comments, like one of the comments this morning I read was, hey man, I love your voice. I've been listening to you since I was 10 years old, but I would really like to hear something new because this was on the other channel. I just heard it, 2 months ago. Well, that's where I see in those moments where I go, try Nevermore Hollows. We write our own stories. We record our own stories. You're not going to hear it anywhere else. So I like that we're trying to offer something different. But one of the things that we do here too is when I started looking at the competition 3 years ago, there were no background noises. It was all music. There was some sort of cool, creepy music.
Yeah.
I started doing these sound effects, and now you're starting to see other people do sound effects. Now, I'm not saying that I'm too small for anybody to have noticed that, but I find it interesting, and it makes me feel good that maybe I was on the cusp of that.
Yeah.
I was thinking of that before some other folks were, and I've started using other folks as voice actors now, and I feel that adds a depth too, because I'm limited in my acting chops. So when I have folks that are coming on and doing some voices, and Chris has been doing some voices for me here lately, and his Mr. Crispy voice is very creepy, and I can't wait for people to hear it.
It is very creepy.
Because you just heard it. We played it for you.
It's nothing like his speaking voice at all. When it came out of your devices there, I kind of looked over at him and I thought, that's you?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So he takes direction well too, because I hear things in my head, obviously as a writer, and I just don't act them out well. So with Chris, you can give him direction, and he's going to take it to heart. Like we took we're taking some creative leaps on the voices on Mr. Crispy. He does 4 voices this time around. One of them is an old man, and then you've got 2 brothers. And one of the brothers has a very distinct voice that when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that's terrible. But hearing it in the mix, it's so good because it's a clearly defined character, which is what you want in a story, a clearly defined character that's separate from everybody else. So, and then talking about the immersion, I started doing sound effects, like doors creaking, gunshots and things like that. And today, you're being in the bunker for the first time, right?
Yes.
You got to do some Foley work today.
Yeah,
you got
fun.
to help, do some door rattling. So for those of you that haven't, well, the story Mr. Crispy is not out yet, but there's a scene where there's something going on with a crematory, and we hear some noises coming from the crematory. That is James Joseph Jones doing those sounds in the upcoming story.
I haven't done a voiceover yet, but that's my sound over.
Yep.
My sound dub.
Yep, you're going to be doing some voices. I can't wait. I've already got I've got a couple of characters that I'm working on, and I see one clearly for you. So once I get that character more defined and that story written, you're going to come over and do some voice work.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I decided to wing this because I didn't want it to be too scripted, and I'm also lazy, and I've actually started working a lot. So I don't have any more questions right now. You've answered the ones I was really after that have been either... Whenever we meet up, we get onto other topics because you and I will just... It's like we feed off of each other, and he left and I forgot to ask him this, or the next time. But and I'm glad that you allowed me to interview you, because you've got this very interesting, history background with your past jobs, which have, as you've illustrated today, really helped with your understanding when you were a mystery writer, crime writer, detective kind of stuff. You'd been there, you'd lived that world, you had a lot to feed off, and I haven't really taken full advantage of my own past. I worked 14 years at a level 4 mental health facility before it was closed down due to, I would call it politics. We'll just leave it at that. But anyway, I saw things that I haven't seen since. I probably never will see again.
And you can pull that into
Right.
your writing experience.
Sure.
I'm surprised, because you're a clever and creative man. And I'm surprised that you haven't done it already.
I'm not sure about the clever part. The creative part, I'll meet you halfway. But there's always I thank you, and there's always room for improvement. Like we discussed in a past one of the past podcast segments, that if you want to grow as an artist, and it doesn't matter what the medium is that you're working from, whether it's visual, music, writing, if you're not open to honest and constructive feedback and criticism, you're going to stagnate, or you're already probably someone who's very defensive, perhaps worried about your own talent and abilities. Well, you just don't get it. You don't understand me. Right. I don't need to fix this. I don't need to do anything about this. There are circumstances where, as an artist, you know, anything you create, you have a right to stand by why you did it. But I think those of us who really want to grow, and we're not going to get all our feathers all ruffled all the time because of something somebody says. And no one's going to like everything we do right. every single time. And I find that from criticism, even the type that can be nasty or negative, that there's something to be learned from that. Whether sometimes the truth is hurts the most, and if you can learn from it, you know, I've learned to pick up things from people that I've ended up, you know, relationships of various kind, friendships or amorous relationships that have fallen apart. Right or wrong, I've learned from those past experiences, and sometimes even those that you might want to consider enemies, they've taught you something, and if nothing else, they've shown you, like I used to say in the mental health field, patience and people will find buttons and push them. Buttons that you didn't even know you had.
Good point.
And things that will set you off that you weren't even aware of. So we're all proud of our children, and we'll defend our little creations like any good parent would a child. But at the same time, I think there's always room for improvement. And there's if for example, we read as writers. We read a lot, and then, you know, we create, we write, we learn, we improve over time with practice, feedback, hanging around other authors, creative individuals, and I think the goal is always to improve. We've all had experiences with favorite authors. Hey, I can't wait until her next book comes out, and it's maybe a letdown. No author can
sustain everyone,
right? Yeah. But you know what? It's like with music. Well, I like that band. They were first getting started, and I got their first 3 albums. I don't know what the heck they think they're doing now with this, you know, sellout sound. But you know what? Good for them if they've picked up 3 times the audience they had before.
Right.
They had to do what they had to do, or anyway, that's just where they've gone in that musical direction. And it might be the case where, okay, we have to part ways now. I'm always going to love your 3 albums. Not really buying your new stuff right now, but I'll always have that. And
right.
It's the same way with books. We'll have those. We read several books, and then all of a sudden, what was this author thinking, man? Were they pressed for time? Were they just using ghostwriters, just cranking this stuff out now because they have a name and they know that people are going to buy their stuff regardless of how good or bad it is? I don't ever want to get to a point where I'm writing. I'm not saying I wouldn't use a ghostwriter if I had, you know, the opportunity, if the circumstances were right. But what I would never want to happen is for my writing to deteriorate
right.
or to suffer. Again, whether I've given it my all or not every reader is going to appreciate it as much as the last one or the next one.
Right. You know, and I get that, you know, because especially when you're trying to take risks, you know, like what you and I both are doing in our writing. If you take risks, some people are just not going to be on board. You know, they're going to say, you know what, I think the monsters you're coming up with are stupid. I think your characters are stupid. I think the quirkiness that you try to write into your horror is stupid. You know, and just recently, I put out. I used to like to name, I think we talked about this before, I used to like to name the stories in a clever way so that when you got into the story, you went, I understand why he named it that. Well, you can't do that because we got so many people literally judging the book by the cover or the story by its name. Well, recently I decided to just just go all in. And I'd written this story from a little girl's point of view. And she's 10 years old, and she's got a 3-year-old brother. And her little brother sees these monsters outside, and he calls them nom-noms, because when he wants a bite of something, he goes, I want to, give me a nom-nom. I want a bite, from a toddler's point of view. So they fight these monsters that are eating things up. So they just call them nom-noms because, he saw them in his 3-year-old toddler voice, and he called them a nom-nom. So I thought, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to call this The Night of the Nom-Noms. Okay? It is the most successful story I have put out. It has gotten the most downloads and the most views in the shortest amount of time than any other story I've put out. But the other day, I got my first negative comment. Since I've been doing this in 3.5 years, well, 3 years, 3 years. August 4th or 5th was 3 years. In 3 years, I got my first negative comment on that story. It said, this is a baby story. I don't like it. I want you to write something different.
But they want you to write.
That's right. Good point. Good point.
And that goes back to what we were saying. You've obviously had someone who hopefully have been following you. That wasn't their first one. They just didn't like it. But it sounds like they're willing to keep listening.
Yeah.
No excuses or apologies. But thanks for if anybody, because how many people leave a comment, positive, negative, or neutral, when they listen to a podcast, when they read an online book or watch a political video, thumbs up, thumbs down, comments. How many of those people? It's probably a single digit figure as far as a percentage of people who take the time to provide feedback.
And look, I loved it. I mean, I responded positively to this person because you know why? At the end, and you and I have talked about this offline before, at the end of the day, as an artist, whatever it be, music, writing, painting, whatever your art form is, you want a response.
Yes, that brings up another topic. Something that this is really weird, I was thinking of before I left to come over here and invade your compound. The worst is when there's just silence.
Yep.
Or the old classic interesting.
Right. And see, you're right. So that's the point. So if I can get you to hate the story or love the story, I was successful.
I'm been editing a couple of second novel now from my niece Haley True, and a Major League series that she's been writing. And of course, they're these steamy romances, but they're well-written, well-crafted stories, and they drew me in. And I was like, okay, I'm just doing my professional editing and, corrections, suggestions, comments to explain why I've suggested or done something. But I thought, hold back on that. There were a couple times it was just sort of my own personal responses to characters that had absolutely nothing to do with
right.
And I made sure those are in blue. If it's in blue, it's just me blowing off steam or whatever. But this second book that she is working on right now that I'm editing, Stealing Home, I can't stand these characters. I loathe them.
Right.
But she's done something because, to her and I guess her audience, this is a sexy guy, a woman fulfilling her sexual fantasies and not being ashamed of it. Women have, of course, a right to be studs or enjoy sex as much as any man. And I'm not to the end of it yet, but the way the guy presents himself, it's just control freak, aggressive, alpha.
Right.
Doing things that he could pretty much get arrested for that are abusive or like not letting a woman leave when she wants to leave or get away from him. These types of things that turned into this, sexual tension and build up. But I'm just sitting there as a liberated man, I'll have you all know. He could be arrested for false imprisonment right there, man. That's not cool. And It's just filling up the margins. I'm filling up with these blue comments. This guy's a jerk. You need to, let the good guy.
Think about how well the character is written if he's getting you that worked up.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, this is, she did this in her freshman novel, and this is her sophomore novel, which a lot of times we'll have that dip because we've had forever all our best ideas, and they're cooked into this first album or first book or first painting or whatever it is, again, whatever medium an artist is working with. But I'm kind of like, man, she's really pushing me at the same time. I'm feeling that like I've got to really up my game in my next story. So the first time I remember responding anywhere close to that way emotionally was when I read Albert Camus' The Stranger. I'm like, this guy is a flipping sociopath. He feels nothing. He's just living. He's existing. He's a nobody who's doing these amoral, immoral things up to and including murder. And I just wanted to throttle the guy. Mm-hmm. But I realized, wow, Albert Camus just gave me my first real shake,
right? A real experience, yeah.
He triggered those gut emotions and reactions, and lo and behold, my niece has done very much the same with her books.
I wish her all the success. I need to read one of those. I'll read anything. I read all genres. Obviously, my favorite is horror, but I just if it's well written, I want to read it. And there have been books like what you're saying where you were so moved in a visceral way. I have literally thrown a book across the room before.
Wow,
I have.
Who were you reading?
It was one of my favorite authors is James Rollins. He writes these stories that they're adventure stories.
Uh-huh.
Okay, it's kind of like a modern day Indiana Jones, but yet it's a group called Sigma Force. And I love his characters are well drawn. It's just you would want to say it's escapist, and it is to some degree, but he always pulls history in, true history, and there's also a touch of Michael Crichton in it because there's always hey man, if we're not careful with technology or ancient technology or future technology, it's going to bite us in the ass, right? But he wrote a book. I've loved all of his books. He's 18 or 20 of these books out now. But there was one book where I was so frustrated. The characters were doing things that they never had done before. It was almost like somebody else had written the book. And I got so frustrated that I threw the book across. And then, the next day I pick it up and I read it and I went, hang on, let me just, they're in a different situation than they've ever been in. And I realized that those characters were in a growth moment. He was trying to move these characters along in growth so that they didn't become stale. And when I got it, I was like,
you were as uncomfortable or more with that growth in the characters in the book.
And how powerful is that? That's powerful. Yes.
No, it's pyre around here, by the way.
Pyre.
I want to correct you on a word you used about an hour ago. I think pliers. That's also a mispronunciation of plars.
Plars. Got to get some plars. Being a Southern boy.
Hell yeah. Par plars. Give me a par plars. That and a roll of duct tape and we have that sumbitch rolling.
That's right. I've seen it done.
It's one thing you'll never hear a Southerner say. Duct tape won't fix that.
That's right. Because it just doesn't exist in our world. All right. Well, cool. So anything else?
Well, if you give me a few seconds and I have, you as a captive interviewee and your audience out there, I'm sure I'd come up with something else. I'm pretty sure it's ADD.
I'm eat up with ADHD, brother.
Sparkly, shiny, crow. I think a crow is definitely my spirit animal, but they probably have a lot better concentration than I do at the same time.
Right. Yeah, my wife, she always makes fun of me. She's like,
mine too.
I never know what's going to come out of your mouth. I can be right in the middle of one conversation and 90-degree angle into something else, and she's like, I can't keep up with you.
And my wife's the same way. She's the one that actually put this idea into my head that there could be some I still call it ADD. She calls it ADD because I've never had enough energy to be hyperactive. I said, they call it all ADHD now, and I think that refers to the hyperactivity going on in your brain, which is, because I asked her one time, I said, well, how do you concentrate on this or that with all that music in your head? And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, there's always music in my head. There's always, and it's not that I'm creating music, but some of my favorite music or just something, and I don't even know half the time where it comes from. It's pleasurable, but at the same time, I guess it can be a distraction when you're trying to accomplish things without getting off task.
Right.
But yeah, that was a completely foreign concept to her, and I just thought everybody played music in their heads.
My wife, she can, I'll ask her, what are you thinking? Nothing. Wow. I would love to be able to do that. And she'll spend, like on a Saturday, she'll sleep in, then she'll get up, and she'll just come down here and hang out on the couch. By 10 o'clock, I've walked 4 miles, right? I've written probably 2,000 words on a story. I've made a social post. I just cannot sit still. I'm constantly, and she's like, if you could just sit down with me and watch this show, you might relax. And I try. So what I've determined is I found a little piece of, it's just a leather string. And I have found that I can make it all the way through a TV show if I have that leather string in my hands and I'm playing with it.
Now, see, I'm the opposite as far as TV, and I guess I saw this with some of the kids I worked with. They'd be running all over the place, not able to focus, just constantly distracted and distracting. And suddenly, when it was their hour of video game time, boom.
Yeah.
That's all they're doing, and they're into it, and you don't have to worry about where they've gone or where they are or to be looking for them. They're right there, and they're on task. My stepson, same way. When I watch TV, I'll pause it every time my wife will get up.
Yes,
ask me
I
a question,
do that too. Yeah.
try to talk to me, and it's the same way when she's asking me questions or talking to me when I've got a book in my hand. She calls it the look. When I'll sort of close the book, and because I have to put everything aside. And I guess that's another thing that people with ADD, ADHD do. I mean, it's either a full-on.
Mm-hmm. You're totally committed.
You're either a marksman with what you're doing, or you're a scattergun.
Right.
I mean, you're all over the place. And with my gardening, it's very evident. I'll find tools that I thought I'd gathered up and put back in the garage the day before, but I'm glad it didn't rain. Or I'll be weeding something and I'll get up to get a drink, and then when I come back out, I do something and then a few hours later, how did I get from there to here? And she notices it with pretty much everything I do.
Yeah. I call it the domino effect.
Yeah.
She's like, wait a minute. We were talking about, the neighbor's flower garden. How did we get onto
Planet of the Apes?
That's right. And I go, okay, and I've worked her through it. I go, okay, the flowers reminded me of this, which reminded me of this, which reminded me of this. And she goes, that's like 30 things in a second.
So?
I go, yes. It's that fast. Those dominoes fall fast when you've got ADHD.
And something happened weird. It was 2 days ago. We were sitting on the couch, watching Midsummer Murders or something, and she made a comment, something completely obscure that she'd seen or heard, and I looked at her and I thought, just 3 hours ago, I was just thinking about that. And she looked at me like I was from Planet Freakout.
Right,
I thought,
right.
What are the chances? Because that thought, whatever I was thinking, it had never come through my head before, and she had never seen whatever it was. Of course, when it went into my head, it pushed out other memories, and now new memories have gone into my head, so that one's lost, but I still remember it was about something obscure.
Right.
So,
and I'm that way too. I have a lot of trivial knowledge, and because folks like us, and Chris is one of us too. We're so interested in so many things. That's why we can engage with anybody.
We'll make a good a trivia team. Yes,
we would do it. We would crush it. But that's the thing, because we're so interested in so many things, and that's what helps us be able to have a conversation with anybody. One of the two things I'll say is because of ADHD. Right now I have a list of story ideas for Nevermore Hollows. And when I first started Nevermore Hollows, I'm like, I'm a creative guy, but can I sustain this? Right? as of today, and it's because somebody will say something. My wife will say something like what you're just talking about, or Chris will say something, or I'll just be outside and I'll see a bumblebee, and the domino effect goes, story idea. Right now, I am sitting at 1,010 story ideas for Nevermore Hollows. I could write every day for the rest of my life and never get all of the stories for Nevermore Hollows out. I could never do it.
Okay, now I feel like a real slacker. I mean, my niece with her creativity is, slap me in the left side of the face. You've come on, I've got 1,000+ ideas.
Yep.
And you've already done, I don't know where the count is now, probably over 100 of the podcasts.
We're pushing 100.
So,
100, yeah.
2,000 words a day after my 4-mile walk. I added 4 inches to my waistline.
But I'll finish this. All right, so then, now we all can relate to this, right? We all procrastinate too. For me, I ghost myself a lot, and I'll ghost other people because there's so much going on in my head. I just can't deal with that right now. I just can't deal with that right now. So I push it off. But being able, like the three of us, to have conversations with anybody, people that I've never met before, they just unload on me. They unburden. Here a while back, I was at a store and I was reaching for peanut butter as another man, roughly my age, right? He's reaching for peanut butter as well. We struck up a conversation.
Sounds like sort of a commercial, almost like
the old. It does.
Your chocolate and my peanut butter.
That's right, for real. And that's an old reference of the Reese's there. So we're both reaching for peanut butter. We strike up a conversation. My wife and son walk around the corner a few minutes later, and I'm hugging the guy, and he's crying. He's lost it. He's grieving. Man, I feel you. I feel you. I'm going to pray for you. He's like, thank you, man. Thank you. I said, no, I'm really. I said, so what's your name? I get his name. I said, I want to be able to pray for you. He walks off. My wife says, who was that? And I said, I have no freaking clue. His cat died. We were reaching for peanut butter. Next thing you know, we're talking about cats. His cat just died, and he's grieving. So, but it was a strong, powerful connection. And
obviously,
I think
yeah,
folks like us, we can have those moments where my wife is just the opposite. She doesn't want to talk to anybody. She makes fun of me because I know all of our neighbors' names and she doesn't know one. And she goes, I don't want to know. She goes, I just want to be left alone. I'm out there having a conversation with them. But I think it's our gift of gab, our ADHD, our creative nature that helps us make those connections personally, which also helps us make them through our art. Especially if you look at Chris's art, and you go, okay, I can tell a lot about Chris, even though I've never met him before. I can tell a lot about Chris from looking at his art. And then when you get to know Chris, you go, nailed it, because it shines in his art. Your writing's the same. My writing's the same. You're going to know anything that you need to know about me. If you listen to a podcast, you're going to know Al, or the guy behind Lafayette Faust. So,
I can't remember if this was just something we talked about on or off mic. Possibly in the last podcast, but what you had just described with that grieving gentleman, I've experienced that just here and abroad, various places. It's happened in downtown Knoxville. It happened in Salisbury Plains near Stonehenge, and I had another experience one evening in Luxembourg City. People would come up and they walk to their own. These are people who walk to their own rhythms. Definitely, many of them perhaps mentally ill, but these are beautiful people, and you're going to have conversations with them, conversations that you're not going to have with anybody else. But I think I used to think, well, maybe it's because I worked in mental health so long, and part of my jobs, one of my jobs was as a behavior specialist. I was called in to de-escalate irate, out of control individuals, or ones who were on the verge of becoming out of control and violent. And I think sometimes people just don't have others to unload on.
That's
or
right.
To tell their story to, or anyone who listens to them. And because they present a little differently, or a lot differently, people don't really know what to do with them, and they want to distance themselves from them because,
and that's a shame.
That person makes them uncomfortable because they're not. so they're talking about something. You're thinking, man, what this isn't a conspiracy theory. They're out of their head. So what? I get to listen to a person who, and it's truth to them.
Yeah.
It's their real world. It is their reality.
I was getting ready to say that. That's their take
And
on the world.
Like I said, I've walked away. Somebody come on, what are you doing? Do you know this person? No, but I'm having a good conversation right now. I'll be with you in a minute. And
See, and for me, I've always been drawn to the people that everybody else shunned. Case in point, when I was an investigator, 24 years ago now, okay, that shows you our age group here. 24 years ago, I was an investigator, and I was looking out at a group of people, and everybody in this group was congregating, doing their own thing, and there was one guy over there working his ass off. And I said, what's that guy's name? Because I was starting a business at the time, so I was always looking for good workers. And I said, what's that guy's name? And they went, oh, stay away from him. That's Spooky Jeremy. And I went, Spooky Jeremy? So I walked down there. I said, hi, Jeremy. I'm Alan. We have, I'm going to go meet him Tuesday and have some supper with him. We meet 2 or 3 times a month, or try to meet a couple times a month. He has been a friend now for 24 years just because I went up and said hi to him. And was he spooky? Yes, he could be spooky. But he's an artist too. He makes these surreal paintings. And I'll show you one. There's a couple hanging up in Ethan's room. These surreal paintings, and he's this wonderful, kind man. And if I were to call him right now, if I were to call him and go, I need you, he would go, where are you? So we're that's one of the things I've always tried to make sure that I am open to all people, because that keeps life interesting. And you never know, you may become a friend of somebody who is very lonely, and you may not only brighten their lives, but they're going to brighten your life.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a good nugget probably to stop on, especially we're coming up on an hour. But
wow, it always flies by. Lafayette, it always flies by.
I love it, and I want to have more conversations like this. On the next conversation, Chris has been standing over here in the corner of the bunker, but the next conversation, the 3 of us, let's pick a few topics and let's have a discussion and see where that takes us. But the thing about Nevermore Hollows is I love all people. I want all people to come visit Nevermore Hollows, have a good time, hear a good story, be challenged. Every now and then I like to challenge you. But all comments are welcome, and I hope that you subscribe, you like, you go give me 5 stars, you buy James Joseph Jones's books, and Chris Madman Goins at Black Sheep Studios TN. He's got amazing art, and just go check him out. He's on Instagram, and I'll try to put all the links to everything in this show notes when this is out there. But other than that, we appreciate everybody for listening. We appreciate everybody for supporting Nevermore Hollows and Joseph and or James's work and Chris's work. And with that, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.